it is time for some sci-fi reviews. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today's video has two sci-fi reviews for you. That is Wixon's Day by Phil Williams and also 3 Grams of Elsewhere by Andy Geisler. These are two books which are currently in the SPSFC competition, part of the slush pile that was the 290 odd books that were entered into that competition, which I've happened to read and have reviews for. So, before we jump into those reviews, make sure you check the description box down below for links to my social media and Discord, should you want to come along for the ride. We'll be starting off with Wixon's Day today and then moving on to the 3 Grams of Elsewhere, so I will have timestamps down below. If you're more interested in one than the other, you can go ahead and click those. So let's start off with Wixon's Day by Phil Williams. Wixon's Day was an intriguing tale of self-discovery which was wrapped in an action-packed post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel. We, as the reader, follow the character Marcos as he travels north on his steampunk-esque ship called the Hypnagogia. I probably pronounced that terribly, and I apologize to the author. Marcos wants to see the world, and he won't let these ideas of sort of house and home stopping him seeing from everything the world has to offer, even though he keeps being reminded, don't you want to settle down? Don't you want to have kids, etc. and so forth. He is asked countless times throughout this story when he's going to settle down, when he's going to have a family, when he's going to find his own place and have that inner peace that comes with all those things, and Marcos just isn't interested. That life isn't for him. His friends and family wave him off each time he sets on sail on his one-cabin ship, continuing his adventures into the dangerous Deadlands. Joining him on his journey into the dangerous Deadlands is a young girl named Red. Only her presence on his ship must remain a secret. This charming 6-year-old stole his heart while he was working in the mines, and he started to piece together that all was not as it seemed, and the children in that environment were in grave danger. While he was there, he realized that he had to get her out and get her home. As Marcos and Red move their way north, he becomes part of something much bigger than himself. War is brewing and it's coming too close to home. Sticking his head in the sand is no longer an option. Marcos will need to pick a side. Ignorance is just as dangerous as action. Will he help protect the things he loves, or will he become a part of their destruction? This story was quite intriguing. It had a lot of interesting messages and thematics throughout it. I quite enjoyed some of the world building and the atmosphere that Williams has provided in this tale, and like I said, those thematics, I quite enjoyed the exploration as they were spattered sort of throughout the story. Our main character Marcos is so unapologetic in his love for his ship. It might look beat up, but it works fine, and it's very clearly his home. There was an interesting conversation to be had around how different people perceive home and how different people perceive happiness. Like, some people might want family, and that was obviously a big value for a lot of people in this book, but for him it was adventure and wanting something different, and there was a really nice conversation to be had around that. Speaking of the ship and his home, I really liked the way that we traveled on the Hypnagogia, I'm going with that pronunciation, and the atmosphere of the vessel itself, as well as the different towns that we as the reader got to experience during the journey. I thought that this exploration and sort of town hopping was a lot of fun. Williams has put in quite a lot of work to make each stop feel unique, from the protagonist's hometown where he caught up with old friends, he was talking to his siblings, and it felt very much like home, to the more dangerous cities of this journey, which were overrun with bandits and just not going to be a fun time should he get caught up in that. The atmosphere of danger in these areas was built up quite well, and as a reader I got to experience that tension as Marcos made connections and navigated himself through some very interesting situations. I do want to take some time to talk about thematics that are definitely worth noting in this book. The first is that ignorance of a situation can be just as dangerous as taking part in horrific events yourself. There was a conversation here about if every member of the population buries their head in the sand, progress will not be made. There is only one side of the story being told. I think this is something that's quite relevant in our time in the world at the moment, that burying our head in the sand can be just as dangerous as getting in and being part of something negative for the world. There was also some really sweet moments in this book of care and protection between the young child Red and Marcos, showing us that thematic and opening that discussion up of making sure that we're looking out for those less fortunate and those who may not be able to understand what is happening around them but are caught in the crossfire for no fault of their own. To just remember to love our fellow person and to bring kindness into the world. So I really like the travel aspect. I really like the thematics that we had in this book. Where this book fell short for me personally was in the prose and certain unnecessary scenes with characters that I didn't really feel like added anything to the story. Although this tale is very action heavy, the prose felt somewhat bland to me in sections, like the author was still finding their voice as they were writing this book. I also feel like there were a few characters along the way and interactions with one person in particular I feel like didn't add anything to the story. That is my opinion. It was a certain sexual encounter that happened and I was like, if that wasn't there at all, the story would have been the same without it. The interactions with this person sort of came off as awkward and unnecessary to me as the reader. And by the time that this character had been introduced, I feel like the author had already established the point that they were trying to make, and it could have just been cut from the book overall. So that was Wixon's Day, a very quick review of what is quite a short book at about 350 pages. I think the story of this one is absolutely there, and there is more travel to be had as this world expands. I'm very interested in reading something else by Phil Williams, maybe not in this series, one of the more recent novels that they have put out. So I will be keen to check out more from this author. The next review we have is 3 Grams of Elsewhere. This is by Andy Geisler, and this was a really thought-provoking sci-fi. It deals with empathy and how we as humans connect to one another, and I thought it was explored in such an interesting way. So in this one, we follow Harmony BB Kane, I think is the surname, and they are an empath, perhaps the world's most powerful one at that, which is why BB has decided to remain unlinked all this time. So after hanging up his investigative hat, he's chosen to spend the remainder of his years in a rural Wisconsin retirement community with a very select group of friends and his faithful cat and a constant supply of the drug that gives him the most peace and just numbs those emotions from other people. But unfortunately for him, his peace cannot last forever. After all, he is an old man now. But unfortunately for him, his peace cannot last forever. When a number of impossible killings make waves in North America, BB finds himself being brought into yet another investigation he wants nothing to do with. He was never any good at this investigative stuff anyway. But when the killings turn out to be something only an empath can be behind, he feels torn. As much as he wishes he could resist the pleas of help, it was this person, BB, who helped to create the motes which are causing the deaths in the first place. It was BB who helped the government weaponize empathy. He is now torn between his civil duty and an extremely persistent friend who can't leave a puzzle left unsolved, and also his desire to just stay in bed and live out the rest of his days. BB is going to have to make a choice which has already really been made for him. He just needs to come to terms with it. This book was such an interesting read for me. It read very fast. It was super intriguing as I made my way through, and in all honesty, I can't sit here and pretend I understood everything in it because I got lost a few times, but I still found it utterly fascinating. The biggest sell for me in 3 Grams of Elsewhere was definitely the thematics that were covered. So I tend to find personally, when I read sci-fi, I tend to get more drawn into the conversations that these stories are having. So you'll probably hear a lot of that as I read sci-fi. I tend to seek more or see more in it when it comes to the thematics. The topics that were covered in this book were connection and social commentary on things like social media, the binaries, and the human condition that were all super interesting to uncover. The author has done quite a good job of making the reader think about how we ourselves react to others' emotional needs, how it makes us feel, and how we use that to guide our actions for better or worse of other people and ourselves. I also thought this book had quite interesting commentary surrounding how we as humans can use slight differences in our mindsets and our upbringing to the detriment or the betterment of humanity. We can use them to start a war, we can use them to find connection. The lines are extremely blurred, and it's really how we perceive those things in our lives which will determine which way we will go. If you haven't gathered already, this is certainly a book that made me think. Another thing that I quite liked in this book was the characters. So BB was so unapologetic in his not wanting to be involved and needing to put his mental health first and needing to look after himself to the detriment of others. But he knew that. He knew that this was selfish, and he knew that this was to the detriment of others. He had purposefully chosen a close knit of friends and remained closed within that group and loyal to those friends. The reader could see, or I could see as the reader, I should say, just how much BB really adored these people in his life. Although he didn't want much to do with anyone else, he also couldn't help but treat everyone else around him with respect. It's okay for people to be selfish as long as they're still kind to the other people around them. And I think that this character did a really good job of showcasing that, you know, you can choose to live your life a certain way, but don't be an asshole to anyone else around you. So this character was so respectful and so civil to everyone else, even though he really didn't want anything to do with them. Even to the point where those people might have wished him harm. He was like, you know what, I'm going to be polite and I'm going to take the high road. And I thought that was really powerful as well. I think this also opens up a conversation about how we treat others and how that reflects on us as a human, and how it affects other people, and why it's important to try and come from a place of understanding, even if you don't agree with someone's views. Each character that we got to see on a closer level in the 3 Grams of Elsewhere was memorable in some way. There are quite a few characters in this book which didn't have a lot of page time, which, you know, you could sort of give or take, but we had a number of characters which were very important and brought important things to the conversation. We had Dis, who's a very persistent older woman who was begging BB to take on the case. We had Dread, the agent who was assigned to babysit him between meetings in the main city. And the characters that we really got to know all had something to add, even if they didn't have a great deal of page time. I will say that some parts of this book were a little bit rambly and a little bit convoluted because it was exploring those thematics, but I would still encourage you to give it a shot, even if you're a little bit confused by some of the premise. I think there's a lot of important conversations to be had. The heart is here. The heart is there in the 3 Grams of Elsewhere, and you know, it's one of those books where you might learn something about yourself by the end of it. Those were 2 really short reviews from books that were in the SPSFC competition of 2023. If you like the content, give one of those, and if you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will, and I will catch you in the next video. Ciao.